Happy Friday, and welcome to our Family First Advisor podcast. And this is a place where we have conversations about family, about capital, about responsibility, and really the kind of legacy that we're actually building. And I'm your host, Omari Whyte. And one of the ideas we explore often on this podcast is designing and building. Whether it is a business, wealth plan, the real work is done long before anything is visible, as we know. And it's really about the structure and the assumptions that the system has the structure. What supports this structure? How rigorous? How time tested? And today I'm joined again by a dear friend of mine, Judah. Judah Mulalu is the principal and founder of 10 to 4 architecture. And Judah is actually a very dear personal friend of mine. We have the pleasure of sharing neighboring treadmills at 5 a.m. in the morning, where we see each other at least 5 of the 7 days. So extra special, someone who I admire and I think a great deal of. Judah's work is grounded in this design, but really with empathy layered into context and then the long-term thinking, right? So in many ways, the questions that Judah asks in terms of his design and his work really parallel and frame a lot of the questions we ask, which we find this conversation to be particularly interesting. But in our first conversation, we touched on some of those guiding lights that steer his thinking and his work. And today we're going to have a deeper conversation to go really more into the structure and really talk more specifically about legacy, right? Because at Judah's stage of his career, he has built something wonderful. And I think that, we know that our clients think about working hard and creating a lot of great results, but we work hard on after those results as well, while those results are being created, and what happens after, so that we make sure that we maximize their wealth. So with that, Judah, great to have you back and welcome.
Thank you so much, Omari. It's an absolute pleasure to be back on the airwaves with you.
Awesome. Well, listen, I know we have, we know we have a lot to cover, and I just wanted to start because I was remiss in our first conversation. How did you come up with the name 10-4?
I get asked that quite a lot. And what it is really actually was I was in the studio, doing my master's at Dow House in Halifax, on the back end of 3 days of no sleep and an impending presentation. It was 3 in the morning, and my hands were shaking. I was hungry. I was stressed, and this sort of fleeting thought occurred to me, and I decided when I do eventually start my own practice, I'm only going to work from 10 till 4. So that's the genesis of this whole thing. But of course, it gets flipped on its head when you get into the real world, because it's just as unforgiving as architecture school, right? Like we really work 24 hours, 10 days a week.
Well, I wondered if you might be up for a new change in your branding, 8 till faint, right?
Yeah. That's how the whole thing started, 10 to 4, right?
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Well, let me ask you, Judah, because it was a couple of months ago, but anything stayed with you from our first conversation till now?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that upon reflection, that I thought was planning early, be it with architecture or with finances, is really about buying flexibility at a later stage, right? Flexibility in lifestyle, flexibility in the options that one wants to explore, the geography even. So it's those systems that allow that kind of flexibility later on in life.
Yeah, it's so I mean, I don't want to sound like we're having groupthink, but you hit the nail on the head. I mean, a lot of what happens, and I know it's because it's real in your world too, is that a lot of what happens is that when you plan early and often, you really end up with opportunity sets that just don't exist if you don't have those plans. You couldn't be more right. But thinking more along, systems and, really how do you define a well-designed system? And I know it's a broad
Yeah.
question, but I mean, you give me any perspective you choose.
Well, ideally, a well-designed system is intuitive, right? It doesn't require a lot of maintenance and upfront kind of like effort, right? It just facilitates whatever it's designed to do, right? I'll give you an example. We did a cluster care housing project for Wood Green Community Services out in the East End, 1080 Queen. And one of the things that we, kind of focused on, you cannot design for things that you do not understand. So there's a lot of investigative work, discovery phase we call it. And we talked to support staff, we talked to kitchen staff because it's a congregate living, kind of arrangement. So there's a common kitchen. And one of the things that we discovered through this discovery exercise, sounded redundant there, discovered through discovery exercises. One of the outcomes of this discovery exercise was just really how this the flow of people, the flow of support, and all these systems that kind of facilitate everything that happens. So the layout ultimately was based on just this traffic, right? So it's something that functions in the background. You don't even notice it, but it facilitates everything else that happens. It brings forward efficiency. It brings forward safety, which is paramount in a cluster care setting because you're looking after elderly people.
Mhm.
But that system was informed by these early conversations with staff, with administrators, and then just understanding how the whole process works.
Yeah. No. Do you ever find that once you go through that, you have discovered through the discovery phase all of what you believe is all of the detail, and then you move on to the next phase? Is it ever the case that you will go back to the discovery phase because it's required?
Well, I mean, there's always, I mean, whatever you do, there's always lessons learned, right? They give you perspective from it, right? And the feedback that you get, and the reason you go back is, people will tell you that, oh, it reduces stress, it improves the care, right? It creates a sense of dignity, right? Because everything is thought out. So those are the takeaways. And then, when you go into your next project, you look for similar kind of, opportunities to manifest that because now you have first-hand knowledge of how it actually facilitates everything that goes on in the cluster care.
And in a proportion of time, like if you were to think of a project having 10 units of time, just for simplicity, how many units of time would the discovery phase take?
I would. It's an iterative process, and it goes the way we work is there's an initial phase where you do the discovery. Like I'd say 3 units, right? Because it's iterative.
Hmm.
And then you go back and you consult again and you look at it again, and you really sort of exhaust that feedback process until the plan crystallizes. So out of 10 units, I'd say 3. And
Right.
it's the most significant aspect of it because everything moving forward is built on those initial principles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is a mirror of how it is the time spent to understand what the good outcome would be. You and I, I'm sure, relate to this a lot. Start with the end in mind. Let's really have the highest definition of what the end might look like before we start marching towards it. And so, I mean, I think you've alluded to this, but are there any invisible systems that, when we and I won't call it intake. I won't call it discovery. I'll call it connecting, like really trying to understand what the end user, what the client really wants in that. And that is, right on the surface. Are there any processes that run almost like AI in the background that, and not to be too, not to be too cheeky, but yeah, is AI also a part of your system build and design? A two-part question, I guess.
Well, I mean, we use AI a bit, from just a production standpoint. But in terms of, invisible systems that we employ, like everything we do is people centric, right? So we look at human systems, how people move through space, how they interact, how supported they feel, and in housing in particular, and especially supportive housing, those invisible layers determine whether a place truly works, right? And it's similar to financial systems in a way, cash flow, budgeting, discipline, that sort of thing. They're invisible, but they make or break outcomes.
Absolutely.
For example, we had a project where just repositioning a common area, for instance, making it more visible and accessible, completely changed how residents interacted. You know, isolation levels dropped, engagement increased, and that sort of, like community, if you will, sort of, supported by a simple move like that, right? But
Yes.
it's in retrospect and upon reflection, seemingly such an obvious thing, but it's often overlooked for the sake of like either budget or finances or whatever, right? Or efficient, not so much efficiency, but we tend to prioritize things and then not really think about how people would react or be accommodated in that space.
Yeah, and I don't even want to give you a plug here, but the reality is that it's simple to you because you have the complex understanding and you've made something complex
Yeah, true.
with a simple solution, right?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because in finance, for instance, I mean, just to to tie the two together, because this is a finance podcast after all, the invisible system might be something like automatic savings, for instance, right? I thought about this a bit, or disciplined investing, right? Those
Absolutely.
those are things that just work in the background, seemingly like boring, but with massive, massive repercussions, at the back end, right?
Absolutely. No, you are, I feel like the engineer today and you feel like the financial advisor. I like it. But, I know how prudent and how thoughtful you are, and I don't know that this would differ, but do you approach decisions that will outlive you any differently than how you approach decisions in life here now?
Well, it's a responsibility, isn't it? The position that I'm in and with what I do. So essentially, I look at it more as, I'm a steward in a way, right? As opposed to just an architect, because my responsibility, I feel goes beyond what my professional obligations are to a project, right? The question becomes, would I be proud of something that I'm doing, 30 years down the road? So that's how I look at it. And that mindset actually aligns with, long-term investing, I guess. It's the same thing. You're playing the long game, not chasing short-term wins. So for everything that we do, we have that lens that looks further than just the project timeline that, we interact with in the now. How do places, spaces get used? What is the longevity of the building? Things like that. And most importantly, how do people adapt with the building over time?
That's and it occurs to me, of course, all of your work, right? Like buildings last for well beyond anybody's average lifetime, right? So in every piece of your work, it will outlive you.
Yeah.
And the question that makes me because of course, as you're doing the design and the detail of what this would look like, it now gets manifested by partners who are construction agents that bring your your pictorial to life. What does that mean for you? Like, do you feel a carryover? Or of course you can't qualify their work. I mean, I'm sure you work with builders who you know, but I mean, it's almost like you have to depend on them to deliver the vision so that it is as it was first visioned, right? So how does that feel where you have to give up that part of the project because you are not a builder, you're an architect?
Hmm.
Then the results of both your work and that builder's work, and sort of reconciling if there's any differences that they have with your first vision. How does that feel and work in reality?
Well, I mean, first of all, you really have to vet the people that are gonna, take on the the actual work of making the vision a tangible thing, right? And the biggest part of it is that you have to approach it as a collaboration. As much as we design stuff, constructability is, one thing, right? So we look at it as a collaboration, and it's not so much a matter of giving up the ownership. It's more of, bringing a partnership into it to manifest the vision, right? So we we sort of look for like-minded contractors that come onto the project as partners as opposed to just, plugins to do a certain task. Right? We want people that buy into the vision, into the idea, and understand the collaboration aspect of it because that is huge, right? I've never understood, for instance, there's historically a very antagonistic relationship between architects and contractors. And I find that absolutely absurd because we're all, invested towards the same, outcome. For instance, we do understand that as designers, sometimes there are better ways of, doing things. We detail things because we imagine them. And then, if you have a like-minded contractor, there's a synergy there because they'll come and say, hey, look, you can do it better this way, right? So you have to park the ego because architects generally are egomaniacal. And yeah, when you create things, sometimes that happens. But like when you keep your ego in check and you open to other ways of looking at things, the result is even better. So that's the approach I take. And I've been blessed to come across people that have the same mindset of collaboration because with collaboration, the results are always better than what the vision was.
Yeah, I think you just, you radiate and you are very absolute and you are, and I think absolute, I mean, absolutely amazing, absolutely wholesome, thinking that, life is more about multiplying than dividing. So if we can find, these it's no different in my world because, for instance, we don't allow any of our clients not to have wills. And if our clients own businesses, we need to know why the business doesn't have a separate will and if that is actually an intended thing. So a lot of times, of course, I'm not a lawyer by any means. I know a little bit too much about the law, but I'm not a lawyer. So we do partner with lawyers because we have to, right? So and here it's almost like the contractor, no different than the mortgage agent or the accountant that we will, and these people are help to bring the vision tangible, right? Because when we say we need to have a will, I really mean like a digital document or piece of paper, like not something floating in your mind, like an actual document. And so it relies on that kind of finding those partners, doing that kind of work. It is a worthy pursuit because when you find the like minds, then you really start to serve the client in a really exponential way and really bringing that value in. So couldn't agree with you more. Okay, well, listen, how do you balance, the constraints today, the firms, clients of today, clients of tomorrow, the future needs? What is I guess, in simple terms, if you had a magic wand, business magic wand, you can't wish for world peace or 10 Ferraris or anything like that. You have to wish for something pragmatic that
Mhm.
would sort of help you with present day constraints and future state desires as it relates to tech.
Um, Let me see if I understood the question correctly. What would I wish for that would facilitate what we do?
Yeah, that would take you from today's current state, which I imagine has its own pressures and constraints.
Mhm.
That's what happens when you're delivering value to awesome clients. And then really, when you think about the business in the next 10 years, if you are, still working on this, what one thing or what magical thing, and I don't mean magic, I just mean something a little bit supernormal,
Mhm.
what would get you there? What would help you to achieve, to break through, make that path easier, make it
Right.
exciting?
Well, because the large body of what we do is based on, affordable and supportive housing. The challenges really are, from financing standpoint, right? So our role as architects, in the last little while has really kind of changed out of necessity because now we take on an advisory role with clients and, we help them put together pro formas for and write-ups for the applications for funding.
Funding,
We help them,
right?
all kinds of things related to actually looking for financing for these projects, right? So one thing I would, all things were and
Hmm.
things worked the way they're supposed to, I would wish for something that would, kind of like, so the need is there for housing. It's supportive or otherwise. The need is always there and it's a chronic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Growing, I would think.
I wish there were systems, like throughout the three levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal,
Hmm.
would like, streamline that application process and not just make it random, right? And that system would look at, especially when dealing, with not-for-profit organizations who don't have like, big caches of, money.
Hmm. Or people.
A system that would look at the requirements, for front end, pre-construction funding that
Yeah.
allows, these not-for-profits to be able to cross the threshold of applying for funding, right? Because you have to have a whole body of documents ready before you can apply for funding. So, we want that equity lens to be, you know, shown on, not-for-profits to
Hmm.
recognize the fact that, these are people providing, a very, needed, kind of service in our communities, and they need help to get to a point where, they can access the funding. For instance, in the last 10 years, I had a very disturbing statistics that only 6% of CMHC funding went to not-for-profits, right? And the reason is exactly that, because they don't have the front end financing to do all the planning work.
So is it because people don't know how to get through the bureaucratic process to be able to unlock those funds, or are there no funds to unlock?
No, no, well, I mean, historically, the criteria was that, you have to come to the application table with a shovel-ready proposal, right? That implies that, all the planning work has to be done. And planning work is quite expensive because you got to get a whole bunch of things in line. You got to get a whole bunch of consultants aboard, right? And as we know, time is money. So if there was something that would really facilitate what we do, it would exactly be that, that equity lens into the funding process to recognize that, not-for-profits do not have the resources, the financial resources that developers do.
Question, and this is totally off script. Not that we have a script, but I mean, is my thinking here that if if you were to be so if you could build a model, if you could take each of your prospects or clients or potential clients' needs, bring all the data into somewhere, be able to then compile this application or keep this application process going. Am I Is that a summary of what you're saying, Judah? That if you could have someone, if 10-4 had a dedicated, let's call it a machine, a robot that would do this, that would be your wish, your business wish?
Yes, because then, we can focus on like what we do best, right? Which is
Okay.
the architecture aspect of it. But as is right now, big part of the pre-designed stuff is just administration, right? Out
Right.
of necessity, because these not-for-profits do not have, people on staff that are capable of, making that leap between,
Right.
you know, um, the requirements and the funding, like and understanding what those processes are, and they're very exacting, kind of requirements for
Right.
funding, right? It's like pulling teeth, right?
Any good things on the horizon for that, or is it still just that's
No,
really
it's
really
still
just the grind and there's no real solution yet? You just have to manually lift that from where as it is.
Yeah, I mean, the onus is on us because, I mean, we have a vested interest in, these projects coming into the fore, right? Like, so we do take the time and we recognize that, from our end, you know, it's due diligence in a sense, but it's an absolutely critical aspect of the project. So we do that work because it feeds into other things that we have to do, right?
Right.
If it were that, that work was done, from an administration side or, from a policy perspective, streamlined in a way that allows the not-for-profits to be able to access those, pre-development funds sooner, right? Without having to exhaust a whole, stream of effort, just based on the merit of the proposal, then that would be ideal. But
Mhm.
we don't live in an ideal world, and we recognize that the onus is on us as
Mhm.
architects, understanding the overall breadth and spectrum of the requirements in the project trajectory
Mhm.
to bridge that gap for our clients, right? Because ultimately, when we do that, it serves the greater good, which is the provision of much needed
Right.
supportive
Well, it
education.
also supports your value mission. You are doing this from that
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
the resources are scarce. The needs are great, and
Mhm.
in order to bridge that gap, it because would AI, and I don't know, I'm being silly, but just humor me, because we've used in our firm AI to solve things that we never thought it would be possible. It was wild. Is there any way that you can bring those parts of that process into the machine and gain any new, uh, you know, speed or efficiency or anything? Not thinking of a person, just thinking of,
Mhm.
ones and zeros doing the work for us.
Well, I mean, maybe it's too early in the process, to understand, fully the capabilities of AI in executing something that is so prescriptive,
Hmm.
right? Because it's a sort of a binary kind of, set of requirements. Like, it's yes or no. Like,
Hmm.
if it's a no here, then it's a no go for the whole thing. So you cannot entrust that to, I don't think, not at this stage. Well, I mean, there's still oversight because you have to like review everything.
Of course, of
I
course.
don't know how exhaustive that would, that a lot of it is very nuanced and it's project specific.
Mhm.
And that's where, like our experience comes in, right? Because we have things to draw on from before. Just thinking off the top of my head,
Mhm. Mhm.
in terms of just putting a template of requirements, right? Like maybe putting in a spreadsheet and outlining all of those things, and then sort of putting tasks to them. Perhaps in that regard, but it would have to be informed by a whole bunch of like input that's based on experience. Right?
100%.
And I don't know how one would necessarily script that to get the desired outcome, right? Because it's that aspect of it too, right? What you put in, the quality of what you put in determines what you get out from an AI standpoint, right? The prompt.
From a life standpoint, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Garbage
Wow.
in, garbage out, right?
It's very
Like,
parallel. Yeah, it's very similar to financial systems,
yeah,
right? What you put in
absolutely.
is, or what you don't put in determines the outcomes.
Right. I think I'm gonna, and this is not an AI segment at all, our audience. So just, we are literally organically having this conversation. Quickly want to share with you because I thought it was great perspective. And because we were pounding on the treadmill this morning, I wasn't able to share this. So, Luke, my 14-year-old, he's a bright boy, and he's also very energetic so he had a project to do at school, at work.
Hmm.
Yes, it is his work. But he had a project to do at school, and he was, sharing it with me. So I said to him casually that, once you've roughed out your thoughts, you should put it in the machine, is what I say. I put it into some AI program. So he quickly and staunchly rejected this. I don't need AI, Daddy. I've got a brain.
Hmm.
And I thought, I wanted to make sure you understood that AI is it actually an acronym for artificial intelligence. It's not an acronym for actual intelligence. It actually is just a tool. If
Hmm.
you needed to drive a nail, you certainly would want a hammer. So
Hmm.
if you were going to, in our in our at Family First, Judah, we have been able to, because of course it is all idiosyncratic and personal and very one by one. But so many of those inputs, so much of that structure beneath, I don't know, some 70% of it, maybe 80% of it is really the structure that is durable for for all of our clients, right? And the nuances and the idiosyncrasies are layered on top of that very firm
Exactly.
structure. So what we've done in a lot of taking that thinking, we've said, okay, if we could have a 70% ready or a 70% done, output, and we need to build it up to the 100, then that far serves our needs and our clients' needs much better than if we were building from zero. So I mean, we'll park that there, but I just wanted you to, it might not be, some things that seem magical are now super tangible. And I guess that's that's the thinking.
That's
Um,
the constantly evolving world that we live in, and we hope that these new systems can be leveraged to good use, and like, simplify, you know, taxing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, we are on I have one more question for you before we say, so long to our listeners for this episode. And it really regards legacy and stewardship. And I know we have touched on it in our, half an hour of our time together, but, is your view of legacy the same view? And if so, is there anything else? I know you spoke to the idea of, I want to be proud of it today, tomorrow, and as long as, for time into memoriam. Is there anything that you want to do proactively as a task, or, it may be just be a philosophy that you want to do to enhance your legacy as you continue with the amazing work, whether that is for 10 to 4 for your business, Malalu Incorporated, your personal home. What are your thoughts, if any, to add to what you've shared about legacy and about, stewardship?
Well, I mean, we typically think of legacy as something, we build and leave behind. But when you really think about it, though, it's more about what you enable, right? It's more about what you enable for people that you leave behind, for others that come after you, and the opportunities, the stability, dignity, even from a human-centric standpoint, and thinking, from an architectural perspective here, and what we construct, how it is, and how it enables people to feel like they belong somewhere. That's the dignity aspect of it. And so it's less about the object and more about the impact, I would say. And like on supportive housing project, the legacy is in the building. It's the stability it provides, I think. And, if someone, for instance, can rebuild their life because they have a stable place and safe place to live, that's the real impact, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And in a financial sense, it's similar. Wealth isn't just accumulation. It's what it allows your beneficiaries to be able to do. If you're a philanthropist, all of those things that are
Absolutely.
enabled because of
Absolutely.
generosity, if you will. So yeah, it's the impact for me that I think has been kind of just in the background my focus, because I don't think, if you recall, in our initial conversation we were talking about the benefit of what I do. Who does it benefit?
Yes. Yes.
And I think I did say that it's what it affords me to be able to do for others, right?
Yes.
And that resonates even more now upon reflection.
Yeah, I'll even add this, even though it's your question. Your legacy is not what you're leaving behind. Your legacy, you're living it. You are touching people and you are leaving incredible impact. And I know you well, so I can speak. I think I'm going to speak for you because we are similar this way. We want to leave it better than when we first came to see it, right?
Exactly.
And I think, a lot of times, even in our world here, people, they're building their wealth to the point where they have more money than life, and, realize that people don't really want, of course, they want desired outcomes, but they want to be in motion, doing things now, as opposed to the object, as you said, it really is that. lasting impression of having that, having the privilege to give impact and value and then delivering that. So I appreciate you, my friend. I appreciate this conversation dearly. I think our audience will gain a lot of insight, and thank you for being so awesome. And thank you for our listeners and until next time, we look forward to connecting again.
Ditto. It's been an absolute pleasure. And, we could talk about this for like hours and hours and hours, chopped to bits. Thank you so much for having me.
It's because we have the shared philosophy, my brother.
Yes, it
And
is. Yes, it is.
I appreciate you, man. So make it the great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the gym soon.
Thank you so much. And ditto
Thanks,
you rest
Judah.
of the day.
Yeah, man.
Have a
Have a
great
great day.
weekend as well.
Yes, my brother. Thank
All
you.
right, cheers, Omari.